why people call Sophie Cunningham MAGA Barbie, and people are starting to fill the arenas to watch her and Caitlin Clark. She's not apologizing for saying that there should be no men in this woman's sport. It's caused an absolute crisis. People are losing their mind. Photo of Brittney Griner with a full beard after being released from a Russian prison.
Brittney Griner is once again at the center of a massive WNBA controversy. And this time, Benny Johnson's viral commentary has reignited an old debate that refuses to disappear. A sensational wave of online videos is claiming that Johnson somehow exposed Griner's gender. But here's the problem. There is no credible evidence that Brittney Griner is anything other than the woman she has publicly identified herself as. PolitiFact previously rated the claim that Griner is actually a man as false, noting that she has repeatedly discussed the bullying and body-related comments she experienced because of her appearance. So why is this story suddenly exploding again? Because Sophie Cunningham's name has been pulled into the conversation too. Recent coverage shows Cunningham and Griner sharing a viral pre-game moment that attracted enormous attention online. And now social media creators are using that moment to revive a much broader argument about the WNBA, physical differences, gender debates, and how players are treated online. But is there actually a new revelation? Or are old, debunked claims simply being repackaged into a dramatic new controversy? Tonight, we are separating what Benny Johnson actually said, what Sophie Cunningham's position has been, what is verified about Brittney Griner, and why this debate keeps coming back. Because the biggest question isn't whether a viral thumbnail says someone was exposed. The real question is, what can actually be proven? The controversy surrounding Brittney Griner has suddenly returned to the spotlight, but there's an important fact that viral headlines are leaving out. A recent video circulating online claims that Benny Johnson exposed Griner's gender, while another version connects the story to Sophie Cunningham. But this isn't a new discovery. The claim that Griner is secretly a man has circulated for years, and it was previously investigated and rated false by PolitiFact. There was also no evidence that Russian authorities ordered a DNA test to determine Griner's sex, despite memes and social media posts making that claim. So why is the story suddenly going viral again in 2026? Because the current political debate surrounding women's sports has created a new environment for old claims to resurface. Benny Johnson has recently been involved in commentary about transgender participation in the WNBA. On August 19, Texas Governor Greg Abbott discussed a political stunt involving former NBA players declaring themselves eligible for the WNBA draft, and Abbott specifically mentioned WNBA players Caitlin Clark and Sophie Cunningham. That broader controversy has given social media creators an opportunity to revive the much older Griner rumor. And the result is a dramatic new narrative. Benny Johnson supposedly revealed something about Griner. But the evidence doesn't support that conclusion. What we actually know is that Griner has faced questions about her appearance and gender for much of her life. She's 6'9", exceptionally athletic, and has spoken publicly about being bullied because of her height, body, and deep voice. PolitiFact documented her own comments about people questioning whether she was female and found no evidence supporting the claim that she is a man. That history matters because it shows that the current controversy isn't based on some newly discovered secret. It's a recycled allegation being placed into a new political conversation. And then Sophie Cunningham enters the story. Cunningham and Griner were teammates with the Phoenix Mercury for 6 seasons before moving to different teams. They have also continued to attract attention whenever their names appear together. Cunningham has separately become outspoken on the debate over transgender participation in women's sports. That doesn't mean she has confirmed the allegations about Griner. It doesn't mean she supports claims about Griner's identity. And it certainly doesn't prove that she was somehow right about Griner. But social media has connected these separate conversations because the combination produces an extremely clickable story. Griner, Cunningham, Benny Johnson. The WNBA. Gender and sports. Put all of those names together, and the controversy almost writes its own headline. But the real question is much simpler. What new evidence actually exists? So far, the answer is, there is no credible new evidence establishing that Griner's gender was secretly exposed. And that distinction is important. Because a viral video can claim someone was exposed. A thumbnail can show dramatic arrows and captions. A commentator can make an accusation. But none of those things automatically establish the underlying claim. And that's exactly where this story becomes much more interesting. Because if the allegation isn't new and hasn't been proven, why does it keep coming back? Why does Brittney Griner repeatedly become the center of this conversation? And why is Sophie Cunningham's name now being pulled into it? Those questions lead directly into the bigger debate about the WNBA, women's sports, and the political battle happening around the league. And that's where this story gets even bigger. The timing of this controversy is what makes it so interesting. Because the internet isn't suddenly discovering something new about Brittney Griner. Instead, an old, debunked rumor is being repackaged inside a brand new WNBA political debate. And that debate has become much louder in August 2026. Recently, former NBA players Royce White and Enes Kanter Freedom announced plans to identify as women and attempt to enter the 2027 WNBA draft. The move has been widely described as a political stunt challenging the league's approach to transgender athletes. Benny Johnson discussed the controversy with Texas Governor Greg Abbott, who joked about the WNBA becoming more competitive if men joined the league. Abbott specifically mentioned Caitlin Clark and Sophie Cunningham while discussing whether male athletes could compete against WNBA players. And suddenly, social media began connecting that discussion to Brittney Griner. That's where the viral narrative takes off. Creators began using titles suggesting that Johnson had somehow exposed Griner's gender. One current video even claims that Griner panics after Johnson's supposed revelation. But there is a massive problem with that story. There is no verified evidence that Benny Johnson exposed some previously hidden truth about Griner's sex. The underlying claim has been circulating for years. PolitiFact investigated the allegation that Griner is a man and found it false, while also finding no evidence for the viral story that Russian authorities performed a DNA test on her during her detention. Snopes has also documented Griner as a recurring target of fake news and misinformation, including manipulated and AI-generated content. So what changed? The political environment. The current debate isn't really about Griner personally. It's about who should be eligible to compete in women's professional sports. And because Griner is one of the most recognizable athletes in women's basketball, her name becomes an easy target whenever that debate gets heated. That's especially true because her physical appearance has been discussed publicly throughout her career. She's 6'9". She's exceptionally athletic. She's powerful. And she has a deep voice. But none of those characteristics establish someone's sex. In fact, that is precisely the kind of reasoning fact-checkers have warned against. AFP previously documented how misinformation about Griner's appearance included digitally altered photographs, including a manipulated image showing her with a beard. That tells us something important. Once a person becomes the target of a particular narrative, almost anything can be turned into supposed evidence. A photograph, a voice, a body type, an old interview, a completely unrelated political debate. And eventually, people start connecting those things together. That's exactly what's happening now. Sophie Cunningham's name is being pulled into the story because she has become an outspoken figure in the broader debate over transgender participation in women's sports. But that doesn't mean Cunningham has confirmed the claims about Griner. And it doesn't mean the viral phrase, Sophie Cunningham was right, proves anything about Griner's identity. In fact, recent reporting shows Cunningham and Griner sharing a friendly pre-game moment that went viral among WNBA fans. That makes the internet narrative even more complicated. Because two athletes can disagree about a political or sports policy issue and still interact normally as colleagues. Not every disagreement becomes a personal feud. And not every political debate proves an individual's identity. That's the distinction viral content often removes. The current WNBA debate is real. The political arguments surrounding transgender participation are real. Benny Johnson's commentary is real. Sophie Cunningham's public positions are real. But the claim that these developments somehow prove something secret about Brittney Griner is not established by the evidence. And that's where viewers need to be careful. Because the more the current political debate intensifies, the easier it becomes for old misinformation to be presented as breaking news. The headline changes. The thumbnail changes. The names surrounding the story change. But the underlying unsupported claim remains the same. And now the biggest question becomes: why does Brittney Griner keep getting pulled into this debate even when the evidence doesn't support the viral allegations? The answer has a lot to do with the way modern sports controversies work. And that's where the story gets even bigger. This is where the story takes another turn. Because once Brittney Griner's name became connected to the latest debate over gender and women's sports, Sophie Cunningham was pulled directly into the conversation. And the timing is significant. On August 19, 2026, Texas Governor Greg Abbott discussed a political stunt involving former NBA players Royce White and Enes Kanter Freedom, who said they planned to enter the 2027 WNBA draft while identifying as women. Abbott was speaking with media personality Benny Johnson and specifically mentioned WNBA stars Caitlin Clark and Sophie Cunningham. That discussion has created a much larger argument about eligibility, fairness, and the future of women's professional basketball. And because Cunningham has publicly expressed opposition to transgender women competing in the WNBA, her name has become closely associated with that debate. But here's where social media takes a major leap. The existence of Cunningham's position doesn't prove that she was right about Brittney Griner's identity. Those are two completely different issues. One is a policy debate. Who should be eligible to compete in women's professional basketball? The other is a personal claim about an individual athlete. What is Brittney Griner's sex or gender? There is no credible evidence establishing the sensational allegation that Griner is secretly male. PolitiFact previously investigated the claim and rated it pants on fire, while Lead Stories likewise found no evidence supporting the supposed Russian DNA test story that circulated online. So when a new political controversy comes along and old rumors suddenly reappear, viewers need to recognize what's happening. The context has changed. The underlying rumor hasn't. And that's why the Benny Johnson angle is so important. Johnson has been discussing the current political fight surrounding transgender participation in sports. That is a real debate. But a commentator discussing transgender athletes does not automatically mean he has discovered new evidence about Brittney Griner. There would need to be something concrete. A verified document. A direct statement. Reliable independent reporting. Something that could actually establish the claim. Without that, the phrase Benny Johnson exposed Griner's gender remains a sensational interpretation rather than a demonstrated fact. And that's exactly why this story has become so confusing. A genuine political controversy is happening around the WNBA. A former NBA player is attempting to challenge the league's rules. Politicians are discussing the issue. Benny Johnson is amplifying the debate. Sophie Cunningham has her own position. And then an unrelated old rumor about Griner gets inserted into the middle of it. Suddenly, people act as though all of those events prove one another. They don't. That's the critical distinction. And there's another detail worth remembering. Griner has publicly spoken for years about being mistaken for a boy because of her height, build, and voice. She has described the bullying and comments she experienced because she didn't fit some people's expectations of what a woman should look like. That history makes the current rumor particularly troubling. Because characteristics such as height, muscularity, voice, or clothing style cannot establish someone's sex. Using those characteristics as evidence simply repeats the same assumptions that Griner has already discussed experiencing. So where does that leave Sophie Cunningham? She can continue expressing her views about women's sports. She can argue for particular eligibility policies. She can disagree with other athletes. And fans can debate those positions. But none of that makes her a source of proof about Griner. And it certainly doesn't establish the claim that she somehow knew a secret about Griner that the public didn't. That's where the viral headline goes too far. The real story is actually much bigger than two WNBA players. It's about how political debates can cause old misinformation to resurface. A controversial news story creates attention. An old rumor gets attached to it. A famous athlete becomes the centerpiece. And suddenly, viewers are told they've just witnessed an enormous revelation. But sometimes the supposed revelation is simply an old claim wearing a new headline. And that's exactly why the next question becomes so important. What would genuine evidence actually look like if someone really had uncovered something new about Brittney Griner? Because without that evidence, the internet isn't exposing a secret. It's recycling a rumor. And this is where the viral narrative starts falling apart. The current debate surrounding Brittney Griner, Sophie Cunningham, and Benny Johnson is real, but the claim that Johnson somehow exposed Griner's gender is not supported by credible evidence. That distinction is extremely important. Recent controversy has focused on transgender participation in women's sports after former NBA players Royce White and Enes Kanter Freedom announced plans to pursue the 2027 WNBA draft. Texas Governor Greg Abbott discussed the stunt with Benny Johnson and referenced WNBA stars including Caitlin Clark and Sophie Cunningham. That is a genuine political and sports policy story. But then social media made a leap. Suddenly, old claims about Brittney Griner's identity started appearing alongside the new controversy. And the headline became much more dramatic. Benny Johnson exposed Griner. But what exactly was exposed? That's the question nobody can seem to answer with credible evidence. PolitiFact previously investigated the claim that Griner is secretly a man and found no evidence supporting it, rating the claim pants on fire. It also found no evidence that Russian authorities ordered the supposed DNA test that circulated in viral posts. So if someone claims there has now been a new revelation, there should be something new. A document. An official statement. A credible investigation. Independent confirmation. Something verifiable. Without that, we are simply looking at an old rumor being attached to a new controversy. And that's exactly how misinformation can become powerful. The original claim may be years old. But put it next to a current political story, add a famous commentator's name, and suddenly it feels like breaking news. That's what makes this particular controversy so effective for social media. You've got a recognizable WNBA superstar. You've got Sophie Cunningham, who has publicly become involved in debates about transgender participation in women's sports. You've got Benny Johnson, a political commentator. And you've got a highly emotional subject. The combination practically guarantees engagement. But engagement isn't evidence. And this is where Sophie Cunningham's role also needs to be understood carefully. Cunningham can have a position about eligibility rules in women's basketball. She can argue that biological sex matters in sports. She can criticize policies she disagrees with. But none of those positions prove anything about Brittney Griner personally. In fact, Recent reporting showed Griner and Cunningham sharing a friendly pregame interaction, demonstrating that public disagreement over sports policy doesn't automatically translate into personal hostility. That's another reason the viral narrative doesn't quite fit. The internet wants a dramatic confrontation. It wants Griner furious. It wants Cunningham vindicated. It wants Johnson to have delivered a shocking revelation. But reality is often much less cinematic. Sometimes athletes simply disagree about policy. Sometimes old rumors return. And sometimes a dramatic headline creates an impression that the underlying evidence simply doesn't support. There's also a deeper issue here. Griner has openly discussed being bullied because of her physical appearance. She has spoken about people mistaking her for a boy because of her height, body type, and voice. PolitiFact documented those comments while investigating the same false rumor that has now resurfaced. So using those physical characteristics as supposed proof isn't a new discovery. It's repeating the exact type of speculation Griner has dealt with for years. And that's why the current controversy deserves more skepticism, not less. The debate over transgender participation in women's sports can be discussed seriously. Questions about fairness, eligibility, competitive advantages, and league policy are legitimate subjects for public debate. But those questions don't require inventing a secret about one specific athlete. You can debate the policy without turning Brittney Griner into supposed evidence for the argument. That's the distinction that social media keeps losing. And once that distinction disappears, almost any rumor can be repackaged as a revelation. So now the biggest question isn't, what did Benny Johnson expose? It's, where is the evidence that anything was actually exposed? Because until credible evidence appears, the dramatic claim remains just that, a claim. And the next part brings us to the biggest question of all. Will Brittney Griner actually respond to this latest wave of speculation, or will the controversy burn itself out once the next viral story takes over the internet? So, what do you think about this controversy? Do you believe Benny Johnson actually uncovered something new about Brittney Griner, or is this simply an old rumor being repackaged around the latest WNBA debate? And what about Sophie Cunningham? Do you think her views on women's sports are being fairly represented, or is social media turning separate issues into one giant controversy? One thing is clear, the viral claim that Griner's gender was secretly exposed is not supported by credible evidence. So before believing the next explosive thumbnail, ask one simple question. Where is the proof? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this breakdown, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more WNBA controversies and viral sports stories. Because in today's internet-driven sports world, the biggest headline isn't always the biggest truth,